Hi, it's Susanna here, and we need your help. Susan and I have had so much fun talking to homeschool graduates and homeschool veterans this season. But we've been talking and we realized that we want to hear your answers to this season's interview questions. So we want to turn one episode of this podcast over to you, our wonderful listeners. Click the contribute button in the podcast show notes to see questions and submit your answers to them. Or if there's any question that we ask our guest on this episode or any other episode of this season that you want to answer, you can send your answer to Susan and me at podcast@welltrainedmind.com. Thanks so much for helping us out.
Hi, I'm Susan Bauer, co-author of The Well-Trained Mind.
And I'm Susanna Jarrett, editor at the Well-Trained Mind Press. And we're talking about education for all parents and for all children in all sorts of settings. And on this season, we're specifically interviewing homeschool veterans who are sharing their hard-earned wisdom with us and homeschool graduates who are reflecting on their experiences.
Oh, it's so much fun to talk to these wonderful people. It's great.
And we have some very special guests, plural, today.
Yes, we have the customer service team from the Well-Trained Mind Press. Now, you have to understand, I wish you guys could see them. One day we'll do video with this too, but they're all happy to be here. So I just want to do just a quick plug for what we do at the Well-Trained Mind Press, which is we don't just produce, edit, and print curricula. We help you understand how to use them. So I'm pretty sure, not to name names, but if you called Random House or Macmillan or Scholastic and asked for help using one of their books, you probably wouldn't get much of anywhere. So one of the things I love about what we do is we tell you how to find the books that are right for your kids and give you some guidance on how to use them. And that is because we have this wonderful customer service team that also, by the way, does a bunch of other stuff. They do marketing and they deal with schools and they have a zillion other things they do. But their primary quality here is that they are homeschoolers who have experience. And because they have experience and experience with a whole array of different kids in different situations, they can actually help you when you need help. So we wanted to bring them on to talk about their homeschooling experiences. So today we've got three wonderful, experienced members of our customer service team here to talk to us about their experiences homeschooling and share some of their wisdom. We've got Tanny Deneb, Kat Stelly, and Amy Plank. And we're going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves. So we'll go in the order that I just said. So Tammy, and then Kat, and then Amy.
Hi, I'm Tammy, and I homeschooled one child for 13 years, and I was guardian of another child for 5 years, and during that time I homeschooled him as well. So 13 total years of experience with both homeschooling one child and two children at different times.
Oh, and we're definitely going to need to come back and talk about that situation because I feel like people who homeschool children that are not their biological children are really overlooked segment of the homeschooling population. Mm-hmm. So we definitely want to talk about that. Okay, Kat, you want to jump in there?
Sure. I'm Kat. I homeschooled both of my kids all the way through and, of course, used a lot of Well-Trained Mind Press curricula. And basically, I love to read about and talk about education.
I love people who have this passion for pedagogy and they just want to find out everything they can about teaching. I just think that's such a great quality. And then Amy.
Hi, I'm Amy. I've been married to my husband for around 25 years. I have two kids that we homeschooled all the way from preschool through high school. And on the side, I've been a long-time Orton Gillingham tutor and have tutored kids with dyslexia and other learning differences. Before I worked at the Well-Trained Mind Press, I was an ESL, or English as a Second Language teacher for a little bit and really enjoyed that.
So much fun to have these three really, really different experiences here. So Susanna, you have questions for these wonderful people.
Yes. So we're going to start with question one, which is tell us, and we'll start with Tammy and then we can just go through because I want to hear each of your experience here, but tell us the story of how you first discovered homeschooling and why you decided to go for it.
Yes. So I was in high school at the time, and I was volunteering at a local museum, the Virginia Living Museum, and I was working in the animal room. And there was a young guy there who's about my age, and he had been homeschooled all the way through. And so he was going to, go on to be a homeschool graduate. And then he said he wanted to join the Merchant Marines. But I was just absolutely fascinated by his experience because I had never met a homeschooler. I had never really thought about homeschooling as a thing before. I'd never heard of it. And I was just really impressed with his nature, the way that, he was very comfortable interacting with everybody at different ages, and the things that he had gotten to study along the way, things, he had so much control over what he got to learn. And he had a lot of ambition. And I was so fascinated by this concept. It really stuck with me. And I'd say by the end of that year, I was like, you know what, this is absolutely what I want to do. And I was in works to go to college for education because I knew I wanted to teach. I wanted to teach biology, but learning about his experience, I was like, I don't want to have children someday. And I really think this is the kind of education I want to be able to give them.
Wow. So this was before you had kids. This was in high school.
Right. I was in high school.
You were already thinking about this from a long time.
I was. That's how much of an impact it made on me.
Huh. Awesome. Awesome, Kat.
Well, I don't want to sound overly competitive. But
it's okay. You can be overly competitive here.
I wanted to homeschool from an even earlier age than Sherry did. Because I was the kid who would read anything. Mm-hmm. And I read John Holt at a very young age, probably about 9.
You were 9 and you were reading John Holt. Okay. Let me just put in just a bit of a background for those of you who may not have read John Holt when you were 9 years old. So John Holt was a bit of a wild man. He was very much a let's burn the whole thing down and start over sort of education writer. And when you read his stuff now, I mean, I find it just a tiny bit dated just because you can see that he's writing in a slightly different era. But he was so big on let's not accept what is simply because it is.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, Kat, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Just wanted to give some background there. Because his books came out like the 70s, right?
His original books came out in the 60s.
In the 60s, even earlier, yeah.
How children fail and how children learn.
That's right.
He was a teacher. So he wasn't burning down the whole world until that was a progression for him.
Right.
And probably the 70s is when he hit that point.
Right.
And I'm really not a John Holt unschooler by any means. But he doesn't get the credit he deserves, in my opinion, for being at the forefront of the homeschooling movement in the 1970s. I mean, he started the first homeschooling magazine, Growing Without Schooling, which ran for a very long time. So I did always know from a very young age that that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to homeschool.
How interesting. And you know what? So Kat, I'm older than you are. When I was coming along and actually when my children were small and we were researching the well-trained mind, John Holt was still pretty much one of the foremost thinkers in home education. And he's maybe been a bit eclipsed by other writers and thinkers as homeschooling has grown more popular. But he really was one of the first to say, we don't have to do it this way.
I'll put some links in the show notes for folks who want to check out his writing for themselves.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
So I kind of want to hear a little bit more about from 9 years old reading John Holt to having your own kids. It was you just always knew that's how you wanted to go, or was there a moment you're like, I'm really doing this?
Oh no, I knew from when I was a kid. I never really wavered from that. I'm very
Did you
stubborn.
ask your parents to homeschool you? Because you would have had
Oh no, that would not have. Homeschooling was not a thing in my area of Southeast Louisiana. And no, my parents would never have done it in a million years.
You know, it's so interesting because Kat, you're from my father's old stomping grounds there, and his parents, my grandparents, were not educated people, but they were really unhappy with the public school education that was on loan to him. That he could, and they enrolled him, and they were longtime Southern Baptists from New Orleans. They enrolled him in a Jesuit school. He was the only Southern Baptist in this Jesuit school.
Oh, I bet.
Just to try to get him a better education. So again, home education certainly wasn't, anywhere on their radar, but it was, it was just looking for another solution.
Well, it was the same idea of you don't have to do what's expected of you, which would be probably send him to either the public school or, possibly a Baptist school.
Right.
But they're like, we don't have to do that.
Yeah, we can do something else.
We'll send him to that Jesuit school and hope for the best.
All right. And then Amy, tell us your first encounter with homeschooling.
You were 8, right?
I think so.
You were
actually.
5.
No, I might have Kat beat because I think I was probably around 8.
Nice.
I did not know that.
My best friend in elementary school, her family homeschooled. And I really admired her mom, and I just loved the way that their family ran. And it was the only experience I had. I didn't know anybody else who homeschooled at that time. This was, probably just beginning 1980 or something like that. So, anyway, so I just always kept that in the back of my mind. Like, I would really like to do that someday. But when I got my teaching degree after I graduated, I started homeschooling for other families. So they didn't want to homeschool their children, but they hired me to do the homeschooling. So that really got me into the homeschooling world. I went to the conferences and bought my curricula and just enjoyed it thoroughly before I started doing classroom teaching. And I just knew that, the opportunities and the experiences and the way I could tailor make education for each individual student, I wanted to do that for my own kids. So I was just very excited to get started. And as a matter of fact, before or after my husband proposed to me, I made sure that he was okay with homeschooling before I said yes. So
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
We genuinely did not know these stories before we asked. It is amazing to me that you all have such similar inspirational backgrounds with homeschooling, of just seeing it being like, yes, my children shall have this gift.
I love it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you all kind of started with this vision of homeschooling based on positive experiences when you were young.
And then you had actual children.
Right. So when it was time to start homeschooling for the first time, what is running through your mind? What are your biggest fears? Or were you just like gung ho, this is going to be amazing, I don't care what people think? Or did you have fears and concerns as you were getting started? We'll start with Tammy.
Oh, I had so many fears. I was always the kid that wanted to be the top of my class. So, and I had to break myself of some of that competitive edge going like forward. It was going to cause damage. Like that's how bad I was with it. But in starting this journey, it felt like a lot of pressure. There was never any doubt I wanted to do this, but it felt like a lot of pressure. And I think like probably every homeschool mom, that fear of, what if I disadvantage my child in some way by making this choice? What if I miss something? What if I don't do it right? That sort of thing. And I definitely came on too strong when we first started. But, eventually I feel like I got the hang of it a little bit more. It's scary when you first start, for sure. But it's also very exciting. And I probably planned 100-fold over what, I actually was able to do with a kindergartner. But
everybody overplans and overbuys for kindergarten. I've said it so many times.
Yep.
Yep.
But it was just fun. It was just fun to do. I don't know. It was exciting.
I did not have that many fears about homeschooling because I try to mostly go through life asking myself the question, what's the worst that can happen? And I figured the worst thing that could happen was that like, this dream is better as a fantasy than a reality. I'm sending these kids to school. And, there were monetary concerns because, of course, there was going to be one income, but other than that, I wasn't afraid of the possibility of sending them to school because I wanted to homeschool. But I had many fantastic teachers throughout my schooling life. And I know fantastic kids who homeschool, who public school, who go to private school. So I just felt like any of those ways could work. And I was just excited to try it and see if I was really going to like it as much as I thought I would.
You know what, Kat, I really appreciate the way that you said that. So if I could just interject quickly with my own experience before we get on to Amy. I was homeschooled in the 80s and 90s when a lot of homeschooling really was very much, if you put your child in public school, you will ruin them forever. And that was just the milieu that we were in. And we were in a fairly cultish church situation. So that certainly didn't help. But I remember when I started teaching at the College of William and Mary, meeting all of these fantastic kids who had gone to public school. And you guys will laugh at me, but here I am because I started teaching, I was pretty young. I was in my mid to late 20s. It was a revelation to me that, oh my goodness, look at these great kids that went through public school. They're fine. And I really think that going into homeschooling, knowing how many different options can work for you is so freeing, right? So I love that was your experience, because it wasn't mine. And I think that that's such a healthier way to get into the project. Amy, on to you.
Well, my biggest fear was the whole socialization, the age-old question about that, but not necessarily socialization, but more so of having a social network. I didn't want us to be isolated. I want my kids to have friends. I wanted to have friends. And so I just didn't want us to be isolated. So that was probably my biggest worry. I think because I felt isolated as a young mom, I didn't want to carry that into their schooling.
Right.
So
I know, but don't we all feel isolated as young moms? I mean, I certainly did.
Yeah.
Well,
looking back, hindsight is always 20. The angst that I poured into this, was just so, I was overwrought. But now that my kids are adults and they're well adjusted and they have social lives, they have friends, I didn't have to go through all of that. But, at the time it was a big deal.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
What were the things that you felt like you needed to do that were maybe that you feel like regarding socialization that you either did and it seemed like it really helped, or did and it was just too much and kind of eventually you threw it to the wayside because it was from fear, in order to keep that fear at bay?
Well, it was honestly my biggest struggle in homeschooling. The academics were not an issue at all. It was really the social aspect, because I was a misfit. I did not fit in with the secular crowd. As a matter of fact, I was at like a social group with secular people, and I had mentioned a Christian organization I was involved in, and they literally walked away from me. Like they completely separated. And so then I tried the Christian crowd, but I wasn't quite Christian enough for them. So I felt responsible. Like, if I felt like with homeschooling, a lot of, and especially in the early years, your kids make friends through your friends. So if I don't have friends, how are they going to make friends? And so I just forced myself to fit into a mold that I did not belong in, just in order, to be in the co-ops and to be in the different groups. And I, on the side, I would try to tell my kids, how I felt, what I thought was right. But, eventually I just couldn't fake it too much. And I was kind of found out that I wasn't, I was slowly pushed out of the Christian groups as well. And I'm glad, because I didn't want my kids to be raised with the knowledge like that was what Christianity is all about. Because some of the things that these co-ops were getting into were like, should women vote? And, that was not me. And I just didn't want to get involved in a lot of toxic teaching. So I'm glad that my cover was up and I was kind of forced out. And
it ended up working out for you.
Yeah, it did. And, my kids came through that, and hopefully they're not too messed up. But anyway, once they got older and, were in high school, they were making their own friends, involved in their own social lives. And that really took a lot of the weight off that, wasn't all focused on me and the fact that I couldn't fit into these homeschooling groups, that they could go out on their own and be free from me and make their own friends. So
I had similar experience with that. I really thought I had to do a co-op for that socialization aspect. And just to be honest, I have a weird child. They've just always been weird. I love them for their weirdness, but they're a weird kid. And now they're a weird adult. But I really felt like we needed to be in a co-op. And the few homeschoolers that I had gotten to know was all through our church went to this co-op. And I didn't want something that's like multiple days a week, because I got into this because I wanted to have control over the education. I didn't want to give that up to a co-op, but we found this one. It was 1 day a week, and my child only took all of the classes that I taught other than PE. So I guess I was a bit of a control freak, but we very much had that problem where we weren't a good fit. And it was actually, Susan, it was your article about a co-op. I looked at that and kind of got made me brave enough to feel like I could step away from the co-op and it would be okay. So I was very grateful for that. And so we got out kind of early, but it was just, it's interesting. It's a common experience. I imagine for homeschoolers in a religious area, it's probably one that's going to ring true for a lot of people.
It's certainly something that we've heard from so many people, but you know, and I just feel like I want to say at this point to those of you out there with younger children who may be listening, there is something about motherhood that is uniquely isolating. And if you do feel isolated, it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your friendship making skills. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your family. There is just, it is something about our society. And there's a lot you can read on this if you're interested. We can I've got a couple of books I can recommend, Susanna, if we want to put them in.
Let's put them in the show notes.
And put them in the show notes. But it's really important as moms to, take that into yourself, say, this is how I feel. It is a real feeling, but then not take that as a evaluation of how well you're actually doing as a family, as a mom, and, as a mother.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. I was just thinking about this recently with Mother's Day. My husband has a friend who is kind of a mom to him, and she has a TED Talk that I might link in the show notes too, that just touches on this and about early motherhood specifically. And she wanted to rename postpartum depression as like postpartum community. I can't get the exact name right, but basically a community disorder where we're as humans used to, having young children together in groups. And that's not how our society operates anymore. And it's a very unique modern problem that we haven't quite figured out yet, but I think is very, very common amongst young moms. And then it's interesting to me, like Amy, how you brought up how that can kind of flow into your early homeschooling years, because you're just coming out of that, or you're still in that state of you're home with the kids, and the world isn't really built for that. So it's a really interesting point, and we'll put lots of resources in the show notes for those who want to kind of follow up on this.
And I also think that the experience of feeling like the odd person out is probably more frequent than not. I think that the only place where you don't tend to feel this is if you are in a really tight group of like-minded people who are willing to all adhere to the same conventions and standards, which is something that sometimes is known as a cult. So, I do find, and listen, all you have to do is start reading some memoirs, and you'll see that moms of young children who had a really strong support group more than often get in, the kids get older and they turn around and they're like, hang on a minute.
So what did we do?
I'm not being supported. I'm being controlled, right?
Yeah.
And it's something you don't even recognize because you're so exhausted and you're so desperate for affirmation, particularly if you don't have a good relationship with, you got older women in your own family who can tell you that, yes, you're doing a good job. You're so vulnerable at that point in your life. So this is just something that we've seen over and over again. And I think the three of you being here are sort of proof that out of that sense of dislocation and not belonging, really good, creative, strong stuff can grow. But that doesn't mean that it's any easier to go through. It's terribly distressing and disruptive when you're at home with these little babies.
Right.
So kind of coming back to our homeschool experience, we talked a little bit about early homeschooling and being the co-ops and that not working. Amy, I'll come back to you on this. In other ways, as you started homeschooling, did you start with one specific style and vision? And did that change or evolve over time?
Well, I read the first edition of Well-Trained Mind when my oldest was a toddler. And that just resonated with me. It echoed what I felt about education. And I just knew okay, this is my roadmap. This is what I'm going to use. And, of course, my oldest is like 2 or 3 at the time. So it's hard when you can't get started. But in that book, they had the recommendation for slow and steady, get me ready.
Oh, yeah.
So I bought that and I I implemented that on my toddler. And we had a lot of fun with that. But it was nice because I had something to pour into right away after reading The Well-Trained Mind. And I pretty much I stayed true to the classical model because, again, it's something that really resonates with me. Now there are some things like from Charlotte Mason, like the short lessons. I have a kid with ADHD, so that idea of short lessons really helped. And also the nature study, we incorporated a lot of that into our homeschool, but we pretty much stayed classical throughout. And the Well-Trained Mind forums were really a huge asset to me, where I could go there, get help, get advice. And I think that really kept me kind of on a steady path all the way through to high school.
Interesting.
Tammy or Kat, you want to jump in here with how did your homeschooling style sort of evolve over time?
I discovered the Well-Trained Mind Guide after discovering Story of the World. So we discovered Story of the World first. And I fell in love with it. I absolutely loved it. And shortly thereafter discovered the Well-Trained Mind Guide. It was like, oh, wow, look at that. And like Amy, I really felt like it just fit with how I felt about education naturally, and just the development of children, and some of my own just personal preferences. Like, I wondered, why don't we just teach history sequentially? Like, why is that not a thing? And so there was a lot that got me going. But I would say that through the years, particularly as I had to adapt to some learning challenges, we probably became more eclectic, and I brought on a lot of other different methods. But I feel like if I was looking at education in a pure sense, classical education still appeals to me the most. And I adored the Socratic method of teaching. That was definitely something I was doing before I even knew it was actually a thing. So I had done a lot of tutoring through the years, and just because I really enjoyed that moment when something clicks for somebody, when you find that way to present information or show them something and you see that sort of light bulb go on. I loved that so much. And I just always wanted to see that with whoever I was trying to help, whether that was, somebody else or it was, my own child. And I just lived for that moment. So whatever means I could use to get there, I would do it. So I would say that I ended up a little bit more eclectic, but still have a strong love for classical education, my first love, so to speak.
Well, and I love to hear people say that they started classical and then they went eclectic, because it just means you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, which is making this work for you and for your family. So that's one of my favorite testimonials, Tammy.
I would say we probably didn't change that much as we went along. We also did some Charlotte Mason inspired things, but I am forever telling people that Charlotte Mason is not nearly as far away from classical as people seem to think it is. Yep. It's a form of classical education. If you read some of the original writings, she is not, she was very soft and mellow for the time, but those kids were doing a lot, that it is not all about, just going easier on the kids. It is very classically inspired as well, is what I would say. And that started from the beginning, kind of after resolving the potential conflict between that John Holt anarchy and
that's a good way to put it.
Educational anarchy.
Classical education. And my pretty much resolution to that was that our formal schooling was classically inspired, definitely Well-Trained Mind inspired, but my kids had so much free time that they could pursue whatever they wanted to pursue in whatever way that they wanted to. And I took from the idea of Montessori's worthwhile pursuits, whereas our formal school day was very short, but that didn't mean you could go and turn on a screen when we were done. You could do anything that in my household would be considered a worthwhile pursuit until it was time to make dinner, and then I turned on Liberty's Kids for sure.
Yes. I love Liberty's Kids. Okay, so that kind of brings me to my next question that I want you each to get a chance to answer, but maybe we'll start with Kat. As you were going through this program of classical education, what was one of the biggest challenges that you faced as a homeschool parent?
My challenges, and this is going to somewhat echo Amy's earlier answer when her kids are small, it was actually when my kids got older and we were approaching middle school, the homeschoolers just started sending their kids to school in droves.
Mm.
So it was no longer as easy as, what park day are we going to go to? You know, we had to become a lot more intentional about their social life. And, you know, a lot of the solution to that is one that is not necessarily what people want to hear, but it's like, if you want your kids to have something, sometimes you have to create it.
Mm-hmm.
So I started student council. I drove 45 minutes away because there was an age group that was 45 minutes away that we didn't have locally. You know, when the parents who were retiring from homeschooling, you know, they used to do strictly social things like teen night. All right, well, if I want my kid to continue going to teen night, I guess teen night's at my house now. You know, and sometimes that took as much time as homeschooling itself did. But it's also, for me, like some of my best core memories of homeschooling. You know, having 20 to 30 teenagers in your house can be more fun than it sounds like. But that was a big challenge for us. Like 11 to 14, that was tough, you know, because they weren't old enough for dances. They were a little too old for random park days. You know, that was our tough transition period. And which I think that's a tough age anyway.
Well, no, I was going to say, I think that that's a pretty common experience is that middle school, whether your kids are in school or being homeschooled, a lot of times you just want to throw your hands up and say, I don't know what to do with you next.
Yeah. 12 is hard. 12 is very hard.
Yeah, 12 and yep. When those hormones start a-coursing, a lot of things just, I've said this on previous podcasts, but I have a wonderful cousin who's a nurse and mother of 5 boys. And she's like, I don't know why we do gap years after high school. Boys need a gap year at 12 so they can just go do something useful because nothing good is happening here. But yeah, I mean, I think it's important when we're homeschooling to recognize what is a challenge peculiar to homeschooling and what is just a challenge. Yeah.
Because you do have that tendency when a difficulty comes up, because homeschooling is different and not necessarily the most followed path, especially in prior years. There is that tendency to think it's a homeschooling problem, and it's not always a homeschooling problem.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point.
Tammy, let's go to you next. What would you consider one of your big challenges as a homeschool parent?
Definitely learning differences, finding out that my child did not think the same way that I do. In fact, they thought more like my husband. And I'm known for having to guide my husband into giving me information in particular ways. Like I started asking questions about the car, and I'd be like, okay, now back up. Now back. You're like, you know what? Let's just start at the very beginning. So there's a block of metal. Now what? You know, that's because I need to understand things sequentially, and that's just it's a thing with me. But finding out what were those things that spoke to my child, that was a big challenge. Anytime I came up against like, this should make sense and it doesn't make sense to them. So how do I make this make sense to them? And then discovering along the way that there were some learning differences that were going on that were not diagnosed until about 4th, 5th grade, and specifically a specific learning disability of written expression. So we were dealing with dysgraphia. We were dealing with some ADHD. And with the child that we were a guardian of, there were a lot of problems that just came with his unique situation, and putting all those together like at the same time and trying to tailor the education to what they needed it to be. And it was different for each of them. That took a lot of my brain power at the time. And it was doable. There were a lot of places where it overlapped. But when you're first faced with that moment of, this child does not think the same way that I do. And I have to figure out how to reach them, because that is the whole point. You can't change them. You have to go to where they are. And as soon as you figure that out, you'll be better off for it. But sometimes that can come with some emotions too. And thankfully I didn't have too much of that. I didn't care about this notion of, I don't want to have my child labeled. I understand why some people are like that, but that was not a specific thing. I was like, no, please. I just want to know what I can do to help them. And if a label in 4th unfortunately, as part of that process of getting there, fine, whatever. Let's just get there. It's not going to change how I feel about my child. So I was just very driven for finding out what was going to work best. And I'd have to say, looking back, that was the biggest challenge.
I feel like that falls into the same category of what Kat was talking about, in that these are things that are so difficult for parents wherever their child is, whatever schooling they're in, to navigate. And yet in some ways, maybe homeschooling, we feel a little bit more pressure, even though in a lot of ways with homeschooling, we have a lot of advantages with being able to see our child's work more, being able to be right there and be so responsive. It's a great environment for a kid who has learning differences to be able to thrive. But at the same time, there's so much pressure on us because we're both the parent and the teacher and, all the other advocates they might have in school.
You can't blame the school.
Right.
That's right.
Only they had a better teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
Amy, do you want to jump in on this one? What was a big challenge for you?
Well, I already talked about the social aspect, but apart from that, I think it was just my own perfectionism. I was constantly poring over different curriculum and weighing pros and cons, just spending hours trying to find the perfect curricula for us. And invariably, what looks good on paper never goes quite to plan, in real life. And I think that's why the forums were very beneficial for me, because I think one of the sayings is teach the kid in front of you. And that resonated with me because, what looked good on paper in this fancy, shiny curriculum was just, was so teacher intensive or just was not the good fit. I just had to look at the kid that was in front of me and teach to that kid. And something else that is said on the forums a lot is the best curriculum is the one that gets done. And for me, that helped because, I'd pick out something that was expensive and perfect, but I did not have the time or the energy to implement it no matter what, even though I loved it. And I believe so wholeheartedly in it. And I researched it to death. And I felt it was the best, the perfect. But just at that period of, life when things were crazy or busy or whatever, or I had health problems, I just couldn't make it work. And I just feel so bad and beat myself up about that. But I learned over time and with, help from people on the forum, just to get something that was good, adequate, maybe not be perfect, but my kids were learning and it was getting done and we could move on with our day. So just a little.
I imagine you had the same problem that I did many times, where I would look over a lesson and I would think to myself, well, this would be perfect if I could get this other subject in alignment. We can cover all this at the same time. We can do this project. I'm going to order the owl pellets. And so then when it came
how many of us still have owl pellets?
I still have so many homeschooling things around my house, but it's when I still have a presidential poster up, it's called the president, and adults, people will still stop at the poster and be like, I never knew that. Like, it is a sort of a place where people will linger in the house over the presidential poster. So we've left it up, but I would try to, like in this like efficient way, just try to bring everything together. And it was the opposite of efficient. And so then I would keep pushing it off, like, oh, I can't do that one because everything's not falling into line. So I wonder how many other people like suffered from that, where it would just delay everything until I finally learned to knock it off. And the forums was instrumental for me as well. And in seeing that there were other people who were like me and like this was a problem. And getting school done every day was far more important than trying to get to this day of perfection where all of my lessons aligned. Like that was just, it was a pipe dream. Let go of it.
Yeah, right. I love that. It sounds like for both of you, the forums became kind of a community where the co-ops you're a part of didn't feel welcoming, but you were able to find a space where you could vent with other moms and get support and kind of that stamp of, okay, I don't have to do this.
Right. Yeah. I never thought of it that way, but that's definitely true. And I'm still on the forums every day, even though I don't homeschool anymore because of that community,
There are so many retired homeschoolers on that forum.
Yeah, it is still a really great resource. Yep.
That's a great place for a new homeschool mom to go then. They can go glean wisdom and knowledge from someone who's already finished. That's amazing.
Definitely.
And it does help with that isolation that we were talking about earlier. Aside from the wisdom of adapting your program or choosing your program, just in the chat area of talking about, grocery shopping, whatever, and getting to know people. And I was exposed to so many more ideas and viewpoints on the world than what I had in my immediate circle available to me. And it shaped me in a way. It gave me a lot to think about. And I would, just take all that information and just kind of step back with it and think to myself, I never thought through those eyes. I never looked at the world through those eyes before. And this is interesting to me. And I spent a lot of time. I definitely read more than I posted, but I appreciate every moment that I had with those women and a few men, because it really did give me exposure to a broader worldview than what I had in my local area.
Yeah. The internet is in some ways very difficult for us to navigate in a healthy way, but in other ways has just opened up our horizons so much. Nothing replaces, of course, face-to-face contact, but just knowing that there are other people out there who think the way you do, are in the place that you are, or have been there and are still okay afterwards. I feel like it's such a great gift.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
All right, let's do the next one a little bit rapid fire. So we've talked about the things that we Kat stretching out her knuckles, ready to go. We've talked about some of the struggles and the challenges, but I want to hear something positive, something that you're really proud of from your homeschool journey. And maybe this is a little bit uncomfortable sometimes to talk about what we're proud of because I don't know, sometimes people get uncomfortable with that, but we're going to just do like a rapid fire. Maybe we'll start with Kat, Tammy, Amy, and just give us in just a few sentences something that you are proud of.
Well, that's kind of an easy one for me because one thing I was most proud of is that both of my kids surpassed my knowledge in more than one subject. And I thought that was fantastic.
Definitely a proud moment for me when my child had got their first job. They came home, I think it was like the second or third day after work, and just looked at me and said, "Thank you for teaching me how to do math in my head." And that was as simple as that. And I thought, "You're welcome. Thank you for noticing."
And I'm just proud of my children, who they are as people. They're amazing, kind, generous people. And I'm just super proud of who they are and who they turned out to be. In spite of all my failings and mistakes, they turned out to be really remarkable people.
It doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. So we have a bit of a biased sample size here because you all work for the press and you've all talked about how you use the well-trained mind. But I am curious to hear because, you're all coming from different situations, different children. Some of your children had specific needs. And I know that, there's no perfect curriculum. We have to kind of make it work for our kids versus make our kid work for the curriculum. So I'm curious to hear if any of you guys have stories that come to mind about how you adapted a curriculum for your family. Maybe it was a well-trained mind resource, or maybe just something else that you had to kind of change to make it fit.
Well, I can say Story of the World was such a big hit in this family. Sometimes we would even wait until, Dad got home so that I could read out loud and we could all do it as a family discussion. So we pretty much actually did it the way it was designed to do. But when we got to high school, we decided to do history of the ancient world, simply because my kid was just such they were just really into the history and loved the way that it was written. And we'd had such a good time with Story of the World. So we did have to do that one differently. And where a lot of it is written, we did it orally instead. And there's in the activity book, the instructor guide that goes with History of the Ancient World, there's a section 3 that is designed to be like a rather large paragraph. And that was way more than what my kid could handle. And we were already struggling with writing as it was. So instead, in each section, there's like 5 parts and it covers like 7 chapters each. So I would just say, all right, here are the 7 chapters like we've just done. From this, pick one of those and you'll do it in writing. Pick one and you can present it however you want. You can do it as sort of a public speaking, like, do it as a talk. And my child came up with all kinds of creative ways to represent this information. And, some of them involved very interesting dioramas and painted rocks and, all kinds just like some really weird ways to present information, but it worked for us. And it's an amazing curriculum, but it would have been way too much writing for what they could handle. So, just a little bit of a tweak, and it became one of the kind of crown jewels of our homeschooling, because my kid got to express a lot of creativity and got to show off their knowledge. And so it was a win-win. But I can say that we've used a lot of Well-Trained Minds press materials. The only one that we ever had to walk away without finishing was Writing with Ease, and then Writing with Skill. And we tried multiple times, but writing in general was just a difficult thing for them. And in the end, we actually never really found any one thing that worked. But through the years, I think we got enough writing in that it was one of those things that we just had to call good enough. And, and then you move on.
And I always tell people that Writing with Ease and Writing with Skill are not going to work for everybody. I always call them our engineer's guide to writing. And if your kid doesn't think like an engineer, it might not work for them. Go check out Brave Writer instead.
Exactly.
So that does not surprise me at all.
Well, speaking about Writing with Skill, we were using other writing curriculum up through elementary and middle school, and I just felt like their academic writing just wasn't up to par with what I wanted. And so when my kids were a little older, like just starting out high school age, is when we started Writing with Skill. And I thought that was, even though Writing with Skill is kind of targeted toward middle school, I felt it really fit our kids where they were just at the beginning high school age. And we were able to get through it quickly. We did levels 1 and 2. And by the time they were done with level 2, they had placed into college writing classes and did like their CCP levels. And I just felt like that was those 2 years of Writing with Skill at that age, at the beginning of high school, just gave them exactly what I was looking for. And I just couldn't find in other writing curriculum. And they just have taken off. They've, done well in their college writing. And so that was, but I feel like if I had started that in 5th or 6th grade, it just wouldn't have made the impact that it did by waiting a little bit longer for that.
Right.
Yep. That's a really good point.
Sometimes adapting a curriculum doesn't mean changing the curriculum. It means changing when or the pace at which you do it. And I think that's important to remember. So,
oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right. I had with writing somewhat of a different story because I have 2 kids who love to write. But as
nobody's talking to you anymore.
Right, nobody's speaking to me anymore.
Lost our entire listening audience.
The problem with that, there's always 2 sides to every coin, Susan. The problem with that is that when you love to write and you're pouring your soul out onto the paper, you don't want
direction.
Anyone, much less mom, making corrections to it.
Yes.
So we went many years without using any writing program because my kids did write. When they were very young, I used Writing with Ease as a checkpoint to make sure they were still, okay, going into this year, can they do the more complex narration still? We didn't use it constantly because if my kids can do anything, they can narrate until, you
beg them to stop. Yeah, we've been there.
So that was a hard balance of getting to a place where I felt secure, letting them be in charge of their own writing to a great extent. And when they did give me things to read, I read it, I told them what I enjoyed about it, and I left it at that. Because I did not want to turn them from kids who love to write to kids who hated to write.
Yeah.
And it worked out in the long run. And then with things that were a little easier to deal with, say tweaking, I used the Well-Trained Mind book, the structure of it, more than I used anything else.
Yep.
Because I did like doing my own thing. And so I would say take the idea, Susan's idea of the history notebooks, and where she had it and I'm working from memory, so don't beat me, Susan, if I get this wrong, divided into things like important people, important events, that type of thing. I was like, I love the history notebook idea. But what I want to see is what my kids come up with spontaneously
Right.
after the history lesson. So we did a daily history notebook, but it was literally whatever they wanted to write about from what we read in history that day.
Yep.
And I still have those notebooks, and it is hilarious, some of the things that they pulled out that were important to them.
Right. But that's what was important. And so I'm sure if you went back and looked at those notebooks with them, they would remember those things.
Oh,
Because, yeah, exactly. Because that's what was important to them. I actually really love what you're saying. I'll just put in just a quick note here that in the most recent edition of The Well-Trained Mind, we separated out the specific curricula recommendations from here's the philosophy, here's the structure, because so many people need to do that. Take the overall idea, but then adapt the specifics to their own family.
Right.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons why we did that.
We did something similar where we kept just a composition book, and it was my hopes that my child would write a little bit more, but it mostly just became pictures. And sometimes they would put something there that was almost like a story, but I have to say it is definitely Susan's fault that I almost ended up with the plan of a grandchild that was going to be named Bucephalus, because my child, when introduced, just latched on to Bucephalus, the horse of Alexander the Great, and thought it was the most beautiful name in the world, and decided that if they had a daughter, this would be their name.
Bucephalus.
And it's in a notebook somewhere.
I'm trying to think of what the nickname of that would be, and I just can't even come up with a single one.
I know, right? We have little Busey. Give me a little Busey.
Oh my goodness, just like Persephone.
Susan, have you had anyone contact you with like, my kid's name is from Story of the World?
I'm not sure that I have, but I will have to keep my eye open from now on.
Has no one named their child after you, Susan?
No, but my husband keeps threatening to make a bobblehead. So, all right, let's get this show back on the road here.
We have one more question before we close out today, and that would be for each of you to share with young parents or parents just beginning their homeschool journey. Maybe they're just starting with homeschooling, even if their kids are older. What would be your number one piece of advice for a new homeschool family?
Let's start with Amy this time.
Okay, great.
Thank God.
This might be irritating because I remember like being in the thick of it with toddlers, and your dishes are overflowing and they're climbing the walls, and someone says to you, "Oh, enjoy it. The time goes by so fast." And so I remember being so irritated by that. But now that I'm on the other side, I feel like I have to say it, that you have to savor that time. You have to, it does go quickly. And, of all the things that I did right or wrong, I feel like that time that I invested in my kids were so well worth it. And I don't regret any of that time. And also that, to homeschool, you have to actually be home to homeschool them, and just don't overschedule. Be home to homeschool. Don't fill up your time with a bunch of appointments or, field trips. Those are important, but just be home, have that intentional time with them, and just, really savor it.
Very much.
Good advice.
I would go on to build from what Amy said about not overscheduling yourself and protecting your time. Also protect your time from other people. You're home homeschooling. You're not home waiting for somebody, to come over and visit. You're not home to run an errand for somebody else. It's okay to protect your time. If you were at work, nobody would ask you to go run an errand for them in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
So you have to give homeschooling the importance that it merits and protect that time.
Yep, that is such good advice. Don't end up being the neighborhood, "Oh, yes, I'll meet the cable guy because I happen to be home during the day." I don't know if there are cable guys anymore, but, whatever, meet the UP, whatever it is. I really love that advice, to treat it like a job and give it that importance.
Because you can keep a sense of community while still protecting your own time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I would say mine has to do with understanding that your journey does not look like anyone else's journey. And it doesn't make it better. It doesn't make it worse. It's okay. And that was something I was tied up in my head about, especially with the being on a different path with writing. Everything was delayed. And so sometimes, things would be said by other kids if they noticed what, we were working on. It's like, oh, well, we've already done that, that type of thing. And parents, their homeschool moms sometimes can be very competitive like that. So I would say,
as can all parents,
it's true. But I guess, I don't know. I do see our homeschool moms can be a little bit more wrapped up to where it's almost like an identity, to how their kid is doing. And I would say just don't get into any of that. What matters is what you're doing, and you measure against that. As long as there is progress, you just keep working at it. It doesn't matter if it's as fast as you want it to be or like anyone else's. Just keep plugging along, and don't worry about the rest.
Keep your eyes on your own work.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
Tammy, Kat, and Amy, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your stories and your advice. I feel like I haven't heard that kind of advice before, so it's refreshing and it's exciting, and we really appreciate you all joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
It was fun.
Thank you for listening to the Well-Trained Mind podcast. You can find Susan at facebook.com/susan.wise.bauer and Susanna on Instagram at hopintohomeschool. Our engineering and mixing is done by AJ Filari at ajfilari.online. This podcast is produced by Well-Trained Mind Press, and our supervising producer is Chris Bauer. If you enjoyed the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have questions, responses, or ideas for future episodes, email us at podcast@welltrainedmind.com. We'll be back next week, so stay tuned.